It feels like it's inevitable that Maxx Crosby will finally be leaving Las Vegas this offseason. He's clearly been very upset with the team ever since they sat him down for the last couple of games of the season. Yes, it makes sense why they did it. The season was over and he was injured, but it was clear that Maxx Crosby, if he's able to walk, he wants to be out on the football field. So it definitely feels like it is inevitable that he will be on the move. But then all of a sudden, there were some rumors that were starting to float around the Chargers and Maxx Crosby. And is there an opportunity for the Chargers to come in and trade with a division rival for their star defensive end? We're going to dive into those rumors, how real I think they are, what a potential trade could look like from ESPN, as well as my potential trade in today's video. This is Chargers Now. I am your host, Will Ortner, and we're going to dive into a very interesting article that has a bunch of hypothetical trade options for the Las Vegas Raiders to kind of consider when it comes to their star defensive end, Maxx Crosby. Now, here's the deal with Crosby. There is a potential that he could fit in with the LA Chargers, not just because the Chargers have the cap space to go out and get him, not just because the Chargers have a need for the position that he plays, but because, well, the Chargers have a ton of capital that they could be willing to give up, and Crosby fits more along the timeline of the Chargers. Crosby is a little bit of an older player. Well, the Chargers are in a win-now mode. In Las Vegas, they're ripping that thing down to the studs as they go through this rebuild with their new head coach, Clint Kubiak. So maybe it's not the craziest thing in the world to see Maxx Crosby in LA with the Chargers next season. Would the Raiders trade Maxx Crosby to the Chargers? I understand that there's a lot of people that are going to say, hey, those are AFC West division rivals. There's no world where Crosby gets traded in division. That would just be insane. Let me know what your opinion is down below, yes or no, that the Raiders would potentially do this. And whatever your opinion is, make sure that you share it with your chest. Say it as loud and proud as possible. Ryan McFadden put this tweet out earlier today where he's talking about a bunch of different potential trade options. So what ESPN did is they went through a couple of different teams, had their beat writers and beat reporters for them go in and potentially have some hypothetical trade options. And one of the teams that was included in this hypothetical trade option was the LA Chargers. Now, what I find interesting about the ESPN trade idea for Maxx Crosby, I don't feel like there's as much given up as there needs to be from the LA Chargers. So according to ESPN, the Chargers could offer a second-round pick, a sixth-round pick in this year's draft, and a fifth-round pick in next year's draft, and that would potentially be enough to get Maxx Crosby out of Las Vegas and over to LA. Now, for me personally, my initial reaction to this is that seems very cheap. It almost seems like a fleecing for the Chargers as opposed to the Raiders, and I just frankly don't see this really being possible, but I'll let Seth Walder kind of go more into his ideas and his background on this. Let me start with the Raiders, who would surely bristle at the notion of trading their star within their division. But that fear is short-sighted. If you are going to trade away a star, why not take draft capital from a rival? By the time the Raiders are true contenders again, Crosby might well be slowing down while the draft picks have 4 cost-controlled years to play for Las Vegas and against the Chargers. The Chargers, with Chris O'Leary replacing Jesse Minter at defensive coordinator, could use help at edge rusher. Khalil Mack and Odafe Oweh are pending free agents, so the Chargers could use their bounty of cap space to trade and absorb Crosby's contract. Now, what we didn't include there as well from Walder is basically he said, well, Maxx Crosby costs a lot, and he is not the youngest, and so that is potentially why he would be so expensive and why he would cost so much for the Chargers. But the more and more that I look at what that trade offer was, the more and more I believe that that is not an expensive enough offer. This is like me going with 7-Eleven money to a 5-star steakhouse. I could go to Catch if I want to, but I'm not going to be able to afford what I want to buy at catch if I only have enough money for taquitos and maybe like a $1 pizza. To me, the Chargers are going to have to pay a lot more money, not just because Maxx Crosby is worth a lot more, or they're going to have to give up more in capital, aka draft picks or potentially players, but more importantly because they are a division rival. When you are trading a player in division, you always have to overpay. We'll get into what that overpay could look like more than likely, but first make sure that you subscribe to Chargers Now. We're going to have you covered on every single little detail around the Chargers, from any of the news, rumors, anything going on with your favorite team. So make sure that you hit that sub button. When we look at Crosby and we dive into a little bit more detail on everything surrounding him, his tackle numbers and tackles for loss numbers continue to jump up. They are high, high, high. This is a player that is not falling off. He had 10 sacks again this year while getting to the quarterback in a multitude of different fashions. And this is from a guy who's playing on the worst team in the National Football League. So while still having a high sack rate, most teams were running the football against the Raiders because, again, they were up by so much. That's how good Crosby is. When you look at his stat line for the last 4 seasons, they really have not gone down if it wasn't for injuries. He missed a multitude of games in 2024, and he missed a couple of games in 2025. If he doesn't miss those games, the stat line in 22 and 23 basically looks the same as 24 and 25. So, yes, of course, you're going to have to give up a lot for Crosby, and it makes sense why there are a bunch of people that want to give up that money or that capital for a guy like Maxx Crosby. It makes sense why the Chargers would want to do it. When you look at the edge rusher depth chart right now, Khalil Mack, even if he does come back, there's no guarantee that he ends up staying in LA, right? When you look at Odafe Oweh, he's clearly been very pro Jesse Minter and the defense that he created. Well, Jesse Minter's in Baltimore now, so it would make sense for Odafe Oweh to want to go to Baltimore. To me, though, the more and more that I look at this team, the more and more that I think that it's not a bad idea for the Chargers to at least give a call to Las Vegas, but I don't believe that this trade is going to happen if that's the capital that the Chargers are going to give up. We all know that the Raiders want at least 1 first-round pick for Maxx Crosby, and it makes sense. We just went through the stat line. He's a pretty darn good player still. One of the best, I'd say. But if I am the Raiders, if there's a world where I'm ever going to trade with the Chargers for Maxx Crosby and give him up, I'm going to make them pay a king's bounty. So to me, this is what I think will be the better trade option. Before we get into that, though, Maxx Crosby will not play for the Raiders in 2026. Do you agree with me or do you not? Let me know down below in the comment section, agree or disagree. Do you think he's playing in Las Vegas or do you think he's going somewhere else? When I look at a more viable option for this trade, this is what I have in mind. You're going to have to give up 2 first-round picks. The Raiders have basically said that to every team, and I do think that is what is going to happen. If I am the Chargers, I am willing to part with a first-round pick in this year's draft because you're not going to get someone better than Maxx Crosby at 22. I'm willing to part with a first-round pick in the 2027 class because, well, if Maxx Crosby comes to LA, that's not going to be a good pick. And I'm willing to part with a 3rd-round pick. And I know that that's high. I know that that is expensive. But I think that is a more viable option for the Chargers to get Crosby because you know the Raiders aren't just going to let him go for free. And more importantly, you know that if the Raiders are going to let him go and they're going to let him go in division, you're going to have to overpay. So is that a little bit more than what most people would want to give up or are comfortable giving up? Yeah, potentially. But that's what I think it would take to get Crosby. When you look at the highest paid edge rushers per year, it's important to note that Crosby, while he's still making a bunch of money, it is fair to say that he is not exactly breaking the bank, if everyone kind of understands that. So to me, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it. You're going to get a guy in Crosby where you're going to give up a decent amount of capital. But more importantly, you are going to get a guy who would instantly strengthen this defense. He would be better than Odafe Oweh. He'd be better than Khalil Mack at this age. Your defense would instantly get better. And he fits more into your timeline. And your timeline is you want to win now. That's what's most important to you. That's what's most important to this team. So do it. If you are able to trade for Maxx Crosby in division, you go from a team that, hey, you made it to the postseason last year, but you expect to be better, to now instantly, in my opinion, you are a top 4, 5 at worst team to win a Super Bowl. So at least call, at least kick the tires. And if they're willing to give you what ESPN had as their potential trade offer, well, then you take that every day and twice on Sundays. But I think that my option is a little bit more realistic. Make sure that you like today's video, especially if you love the LA Chargers. And if you're watching the video today, well, then you probably most certainly love the LA Chargers. The more likes we get on our videos, the more opportunities I have to go tell the bosses that we need to do more content. And make sure that you subscribe. This is your last warning. We are going to have a ton of coverage next week during the NFL Combine. Who could the Chargers be drafting? Do you want to hear from some of the coaches, some of the general managers potentially, or the general manager, excuse me? Do you want to hear from those people? Yes, you do. We are going to have a ton of great coverage all week long here on Chargers Now. So make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss any of that. Thank you guys so much for viewing today's video, and bolt up.